Everybody's got to make a living. It's just part of the way the world works after all. Capitalism won, and like it or not, it's here to stay for the long term. When it comes to some groups, however, well, they seem to be far more successful than others in generating large pools of income. But what are they doing that's so special? Well, join us today to find out because in this video, we're going to be starting a new series that seeks to answer this very question. Before we get to there though, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you'll be the first to be notified about new videos we post every week. And with that said, let's begin. The Mafia is probably something you're all mostly aware of from popular media like The Godfather, Goodfellas, or The Sopranos. In actuality, though, it goes back way further than this, with the whole thing generally being accepted to have first formed in Sicily sometime during the 19th century. And this Sicilian mafia, which was referred to by locals as the Cosa Nostra, would have come about out of necessity, as with feudalism collapsing and capitalism taking over, there was now property being owned by people who'd never had the opportunity to do so before. So, with the locals often finding themselves in need of someone to settle disputes and enforce contracts, the Cosa Nostra formed as something of a private army, doing the work the police couldn't, all for a price, of course. And that was an attitude they would carry over to America with them in the 20th century, when Sicilian immigrants started moving to the New World in search of better opportunities, taking the practices of the mafia with them and using them to earn a living once set up there. And of course, at least initially, much of this would take place in New York, with the Black Hand gangs who had formed from Sicilian immigrants often being accused of terrorizing their local neighborhoods, with examples of extortion on local businesses. But they weren't content with stopping here because, when Prohibition was enacted in 1919, the mob would become even more powerful, as now being the people to go to if you wanted to get some alcohol, they became richer than they could have ever imagined. This then would see them organize themselves into more of a military-like structure, with the formation of the Commission in 1931, something which saw them adopt a formal chain of command. And this chain of command saw the boss sit at the top, all while his various captains were placed below him. In turn, each of these captains would have their own workforce to delegate to, making what the mob was building start to resemble the same structure you'd expect to find in any other major corporation. Yes, as a collective, the Mafia as we know it today really has very little difference with other big businesses in terms of the way it presents itself. The only real difference, in fact, would be that, while companies like Apple, Amazon, or Coca-Cola present themselves as doing things by the letter of the law, their gangster peers traditionally operate outside of this. Now, you could argue that a lot of the business practices carried out by these companies are highly sketchy in itself. I mean, we all know about the borderline slave labor carried out under Jeff Bezos' watch as Amazon boss, and the history Coca-Cola has had with workers in underdeveloped countries. We're not here to say that these practices are right, we are just pointing out that, at the end of the day, what the Mafia are doing is a lot closer to legit than you might initially think. And of course, throughout their history, they've been able to reach such a level through their business ventures that today they stand as one of the most powerful organizations in the world, whether they operate within the confines of the law or not. So now that we've established this, let's take a look at some of the main ways the modern mafia makes their money and what we can learn from their methods. And, surprise, surprise, given their continued nature as an outlaw group, it shouldn't shock anyone to hear that those old methods used way back in the early days of America are still being practiced today. But it's not just extortion anymore. No, now they've also found a variety of other avenues to make a dollar with, two of the most primary of which are racketeering and loan sharking. What are these? Well, when it comes to the former, it's basically the process of going up to business owners, usually ones who are local to the area, and demanding that, in exchange for protection, they pay a regular fee to the mob. Of course, should a business owner choose to not take them up on this offer, it's likely things will start to get messy very quickly, with it being largely understood that part of the payment is being used to protect the individuals from getting roughed up by the mafia themselves. And similarly to that, gangland types will often use loan sharking as a way of gaining quick money too, offering high-interest loans to those in need and threatening them with violence should they not pay back what they owe in a prompt fashion. So what can this tell us then? Well, as we already mentioned before, these methods are not actually that different to what you'd see in more legitimate business ventures. Sure, a bank isn't likely to send someone around to break your legs if you don't pay back your high-interest loan, but they certainly will send debt collectors who, in turn, might just repossess your stuff if you don't pay up. On top of that, insurance companies aren't going to break your windows if you miss a payment, but what they will do instead is something much worse in today's age: screw with your credit score. Yes, in reality, it's only a fine line which separates the legitimate and the illegitimate. And while we don't mean for this to be an apology for how the Mafia operates necessarily, it does show that they're basically carrying on in the same way as everyone else, just with a bit more of a threat of violence behind their actions. So you shouldn't so easily dismiss them as an example of how to run a successful business then, because using these tried and tested methods, they've been able to reach the top and make a hell of a lot of money in the process. But of course, there is still the issue of violence, the very thing which has helped to give the mob so much power wherever the law wouldn't. And while this is where they appear to veer a bit further away from what legitimate companies are willing to do, again, if you really break it down and look at its base form, the idea of threatening someone with something isn't a foreign concept in the business world. Sure, it may not be as dramatic as getting a pair of lead boots attached to your feet, but how many of us have ever felt the need to do something we didn't want to at work for fear that we would be reprimanded or even fired if we didn't? Yes, the ability to put fear into someone is a powerful tool, but it's not the only thing the Mafia needs to make money, because as the Prohibition era showed everyone back in the 20s, there was a lot to be made in illegal activities. And since alcohol has been made legal in the US again following the repeal of the Volstead Act in 1933, the mob have been forced to diversify and move on to providing other things which people are willing to pay top dollar for, including but not limited to drugs, prostitution, and illegal gambling. Yes, this one is harder to compare to other more legitimate industries, at least in North America, as while prostitution is currently legal in the state of Nevada, some lower-tier drugs like cannabis are finding laws being relaxed, and gambling is allowed in certain places. The way the mob makes money from it is certainly being done under less than savory means, but that's never been a concern for them anyway because, as far as they're concerned, they're just providing what the public wants. And as history has shown us, the public certainly has a desire for such things and is willing to pay top dollar for it when given the chance. So maybe that's the key to how the Mafia have been so successful at making money then. They have been willing to give the public what they're looking for even when others haven't. Yes, finding a niche that no one else is working on, then reaping the rewards of this, seems to be the business plan of the mob. And setting aside the ethical issues of much of what they do, it's impossible to deny that it's been successful. Hell, as we said earlier, at this point their success has seen them become one of the most powerful organizations in the world, with their wealth of money still to this day being used to gain further political influence. And like any good venture capitalists, they've continued to evolve with the times too, moving to more modern and sophisticated schemes as the years have gone on, such as internet gambling, online sex trafficking via websites like Craigslist, and even by getting involved in renewable energies. That's right. In perhaps the most surprising development of all, in 2008, over in Sicily, 8 mafioso were charged with bribing officials so as to get a piece of the pie when it came to wind energy, a very lucrative endeavor if you had the means to get involved. In fact, a police wiretap at the time even revealed one defendant to have said, "Not one turbine blade will be built in Mazzara unless I agree to it." So it just goes to show then that no matter where they operate in the world, the Mafia are still sticking to that same code of finding somewhere there's money to be made and making sure they get involved in it in some form or another. And what can we learn from this? Well, if you want to be a successful businessman, make sure to search for the needs people have which aren't currently being met, and figure out a way to give them this. As well as that, keep an eye to the future. Look at what's going to be the next big thing going forward and do everything you can to get involved early on. That way, you can stay one step ahead of the curve. It's all about listening and watching, and if you do this well enough, maybe you too could be as successful as the Mafia is one day. Just maybe don't do some of the other things they're involved in. That money won't do you much good in prison. But that's enough from us. Let us know your thoughts. Is the Mafia's way of doing things a good example of successful business practice? Leave us a comment down in the description. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be the first to be notified of new behind the business videos we post every week. Be inspired, and we will see you in the next one. Since you made it all the way to this point, here are 2 more videos that YouTube thinks you are going to love. Go on, click on it, and let's see if they're right.